By the end of today, President Trump is expected to be the first U.S. president to be impeached. Not once, but twice. The outrage over the violence at the Capitol has led some Republicans to turn against the president, but even without their support, the Democrat-controlled House is expected to have enough votes to pass the article of impeachment. Samuel Issacharoff is a Rice professor of constitutional law at NYU School of Law, and he is back with us again. All audio problems solved. So let us talk about what is kind of unfolding on Capitol Hill now, sort of the nitty-gritty of the impeachment this time around. The president faces one charge here, incitement of insurrection. How strong is the case as you see it? How much does the evidence even matter when you consider that there's such strong partisanship, though we are seeing some Republicans defecting somewhat, but it's both chambers are quite partisan.
I think there's two parts to this, and it's important to separate them. The first part is that, unlike the last impeachment, this is right at the very heart of what the impeachment clause of the Constitution was intended to get at. This is not a debatable question about whether contacts with Ukraine were self-serving or were in furtherance of foreign policy or within the powers of the presidency or not. This is an act, if as charged, of insurrection. If proven, or if accepted as proven, then that's absolutely the most impeachable offense that one can have. So there's no question that this is procedurally within the heart of the impeachment power. Then the question is, what is the evidence, and does it matter? And certainly impeachment at the end of the day is a vote up or down in the two bodies of Congress. But impeachment is also a call to the American people. And so the evidence does matter because you have to make a case, and you're making a case ultimately in the court of public opinion. I think the last segment you ran on white supremacy is really quite critical to the core of the case, because the case is incitement. And incitement, President Trump tried to parse this word, that word. That's not the issue. The issue is that there was a run-up to what happened at the Capitol, and the run-up was a series of events over time in which President Trump either encouraged or accepted assaults by white supremacists, assaults by armed groups on protesters or on opponents that were perceived to be hostile to President Trump. And so when he spoke at the ellipse right before the attack on the Capitol, he wasn't the only speaker. There were dog whistles of all kinds. Fight, you have to be a man, you have to do this, you have to do that. And he did not differentiate himself from that. He did not say, no, I'm not saying that. What he did was use slightly more elliptical formulations to get at exactly the same point. And in the law of conspiracy, which is ultimately very analogous to, you look for an overt act to disassociate yourself. When did you say, I repudiate that? And he sat at his television watching the attack on the Capitol, doing nothing. He's still president of the United States. He still has the capacity to mobilize the National Guard. He has the capacity to try to intervene. He could take to the airwaves and say, don't do this. He didn't do anything of the sort. And now we have threats against every state capital, armed groups in his name going to attack them. Where has been the differentiation? Where has he distanced himself? So that the evidence is very powerful. It is not a question of one word here or there. It is a question of constantly putting fuel on this fire, and he must be made to take responsibility. And that's the job of the Congress. And if they conclude that this is indeed that kind of threat, then impeachment, as extraordinary as it is to have a second one and to have it the week before he becomes president, is appropriate.
So, Professor, Article 2, Section 4 of the United States Constitution says the president, vice president, and all civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office if convicted in an impeachment trial of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. Treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors is the quote from that section. So where does, you hear some members of Congress, Democrats, saying, and others like Liz Cheney, saying, if this isn't an impeachable offense, then what is, right? But within the language of the Constitution, it's not clear what the president did if you just go by what's written in the Constitution. Would this fall under high crimes and misdemeanors, and what is that? Or does this fall under treason, which may be too strong of a word? So help us understand that.
Well, treason is generally associated with aiding and abetting a foreign adversary of the United States. I think that this is as high a crime as one can have, an attempt to overthrow the legal processes of the governance of the United States is, to my mind, the very essence of a high crime. We're not dealing with secondary issues here, and I think it was a wise move by Congress just to put one count forward. This is it. He tried to stop the Congress of the United States, or he encouraged his followers to stop the Congress of the United States from performing its constitutional duty. And that is an assault upon the Constitution. So I think that this is the very heart of what the impeachment power is for.
So when we think of impeachment, though, we think of removing someone from office who is, failing in their role as the commander-in-chief. Here we have a president who's at the end of his tenure. This thing is probably not going to wrap up until he's already out of office. What is the benefit or the reason, maybe, to convict somebody who's no longer the president?
Well, there's two parts to this. First, there's the impeachment itself in the House, and I think, as your demonstrative on national opinion shows, that's a repudiation of the act, and that's an important statement in and of itself. Whether the Senate convenes in time to remove him before the end of his term, it would be obviously better if they did, because then there would be some immediate practical consequence. But on at least one occasion previously, the Senate has voted to convict on an article of impeachment of somebody who had already left office. And the reason for that is to impose a prohibition on that person continuing as part of the political system. And that's an important part of the 14th Amendment, because the 14th Amendment, which postdates the impeachment clause and comes in after the Civil War, was intended to ban those who had actually incited violence against the United States, taken part in the Confederate insurrection, from returning to public office. And so this is very much in keeping with the literal text of the 14th Amendment, which provides for this kind of lifetime exclusion.
I'm curious, as someone who is forming young legal minds at the university level, if you have discussions, or if a part of the understanding of the law and the rule of law encompasses using the law to send a message. And I ask that as somebody who's not a lawyer, because I'm curious, there are a lot of people who are looking at the events transpiring right now on Capitol Hill, and they're saying, well, if you go the way that some Republicans want it to go, don't impeach this president. He's only got 7 days left. That's going to harm the unity that the president-elect has said he wants to be a part of, unifying the country. Let's just let it go. He's not going to be in office anymore, and we can move forward with the business of running this country. But there are others who say, look, people, when they do something that results in the loss of life, as this did, or in an insurrection, which this also was, you need to send a message, even if there's only a couple of days left on this president's term. So is that part of what lawyers, when you're teaching class, or I don't know if you teach a class on that, but I'm just curious if that is something that lawyers think about, like, when they go after someone who has broken the law, who they believe has broken the law, or who has done something to diminish their office, that they want to send that message, and that should be a part of the discussion that we're seeing now on the Hill.
What you're asking is the very heart of law enforcement. So law enforcement has a deterrent function, and Part of the calculus here is how much deterrence are you getting from impeaching somebody who's already been removed from office. But part of it is that it has a moral component to it. It is in reinforcing the ethical constructs of our constitutional order. And part of it is also practical judgment. So prosecutors every day have to decide who to charge, who not to charge. There's a whole body of what's called prosecutorial discretion that goes into the mechanics of law enforcement. In the part of the House debate that I heard this morning, what was interesting is that I did not hear a single Republican rise to defend the president's conduct. What I heard instead was, of course, there was some partisan jabbing at the Democrats, but what I heard instead was it's not worth it at this time. It wouldn't help pragmatically because it will sow dissension and perhaps give rise to more protest. But that's not a defense of the president against the charge or against the use of the impeachment power. That's simply a limitation on the practicalities. And that's a completely separate discussion. Now, your question is a very deep one about how do you instill practical wisdom in law? And the only way you do it is through experience. And I think, unfortunately, that we have little experience. In fact, I would say we have no experience with a president acting in cahoots with insurrectionary forces, with forces that are trying to invade the Capitol, with forces that are trying to overthrow governmental functions. And precisely because of that, I think the argument runs, it's important to draw a line, even if it's a symbolic one, even if he's already out of office. This is something beyond contemplation in our constitutional structure. We never could have imagined this. And we go back to the early elections in this country, when the country was not yet well forged. And you had the concern among the Jefferson people that Adams was an agent of the British. You had concerns among the Adams people that Jefferson was an agent of the British. And we found a way to institutionalize the transfer of power and to realize that they were within the scope of a common collective political enterprise. This president has repudiated that. And I think that it just changes the stakes completely.
It's such a fascinating discussion, Professor, and I'm so glad you were able to come on our air and talk to us about it, because especially in what you just said, I mean, I keep thinking about moments in history when, things could have been checked. Going back to the early compromises that our country made with states, the Missouri Compromise. There were so many, when we talk about slavery, when we talk about, the rise of National Socialism in Germany, if the leader of the National Socialists, Adolf Hitler, had been really jailed, put into jail after that infamous beer putsch in the late 1920s, who knows how things might have turned out differently. And I'm not equating this president to that at all. I'm just saying that there are moments in history where the opportunity does afford itself for lawmakers to do the right thing. And that's what they're wrestling with right now on the Hill, because there's certainly a calculus happening here, right? The president of the United States has indicated that he would like to run again in 2024. He's indicated that members of his family intend to stay relevant and politically active over the next couple of years. And certainly if you're a Republican and you're thinking about that and you're looking at the last 4 years and you're thinking to yourself, do I really want this to continue? Do I want this fracture that exists in the country and also within my own party to continue? They've got to be thinking about that as well. So we appreciate your time, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you.